Hey, welcome back to Christians and Racial Reconciliation. Today, I'm talking about a topic that is going to make a lot of conservatives happy that I'm saying this, okay? I'm an equal opportunity offender, and so I have managed to offend a number of conservatives during this process, and now I'll manage to offend a number of people on the other end of the spectrum. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to answer the question today: do you see any enemies to the reconciliation process on the left, okay, on the political left? And the answer to that, the reason that's important to talk about is because it is true, it has been observed by many people, and it is true that there is a collection of people on the political left that do not honestly have in mind what I am talking about when I say racial reconciliation. They see power as a zero-sum game, and that only power is the answer. Power only is the answer to the basic dynamic of all of this, as opposed to love and Christian sharing of leadership and power and influence and possibility. They see only power as the only currency, and so consequently, there becomes it creates an imbalance in the way things are presented. That means that we wind up separating at some point, even though they may have some points that they make that are right, we have some point that we wind up separating. Today, I want to give you a specific example of that issue, and I want to show how clearly it demonstrates what I would call the political horseshoe theory. Horseshoe political theory. All right. A lot of times we think of the political spectrum as a straight line. And so on the one hand you have the right, and the other hand you have the left, or vice versa, whichever way this video goes for you. So the right and the left are on opposite ends of a straight line spectrum. And I don't think that that is actually accurate. And the reason that I don't is because I subscribe to, in general, a theory of politics and the way that the politics plays itself out, not as a straight line going in opposite directions, but as a bent line where the horseshoe, instead of being a straight line, it is bent so that the opposite ends of the political spectrum, the opposite ends, are actually closer to one another than they are to the center of the horseshoe. And in many ways, those opposite ends wind up saying similar things. Let me see if I can give you an example and show you why I think it is unhelpful in the course of the narrative. Recently, the African American History Museum of the United States put out this graphic, all right? So here's a picture, and it's here on my laptop that I'm looking at on my PowerPoint. They put out this graphic that talks about the importance of, or the way that whiteness and white culture plays out in the United States, and the assumptions of white culture. Now, I want to point out something about this political horseshoe. The left tends to say that we're going to run as far away as we can from any indication that we might be moving toward white supremacy. So they run far, far away from that, and then they start seeing white supremacy in many things that are actually not hallmarks of white supremacy, and they move further and further away from it. And the same thing happens to the political right. We tend to run away from anything that reflects collectivism, such as socialism, Marxism, any of those kind of things, and we wind up running hard toward individualism. What actually winds up happening, however, is that tends to warp the political spectrum in such a way that extreme right and extreme left wind up close to each other. So they tend to run away from whiteness. They tend to go past racism and say the enemy then is not just racism, it is white supremacy. And then they go even further than that and say that whiteness itself as a cultural stamp is something that should be rejected, reanalyzed, and fled from. And so you get things like this. you get things like this aspects and assumptions of whiteness and white culture in the United States. So they say that this refers to the ways that white people and their traditions and attitudes and ways of life have been normalized over time and now are considered standard practice. And we have all internalized some aspects of white culture. Now, I want you to notice that it identifies it as white culture. And then it goes on down and it says that, rugged individualism, and okay, that's somewhat true perhaps in some ways, that autonomy and independence and individuals are soon to be in control of their environment. That is somewhat true as a feature of American government and perhaps white culture. That's a dominant way in which we view the world, philosophically speaking. And then look at this, family structure. The nuclear family, father, mother, and 2.3 children, is the ideal social unit. And then it says husband's the breadwinner and the head of the household, wife is the homemaker, subordinate to the husband, okay? And it identifies that with whiteness. I would tell you that, who else would identify that with whiteness? Like people on the extreme political right. They would say that this is right and good and we should hold on to it, and it is whiteness, and unfortunately the black people don't agree with that, and so therefore we should reject them, and we should never have the races come together because they don't agree on this idea. And that's what people on the extreme right would say. Not true, but they would say it because they're running far, far away from anything that looks like it might be black culture, and black culture running far, far away from anything that looks like whiteness tend to identify that as whiteness. Additionally, there's this slide. I've zoomed in on sections of that flyer. They say, that status, power, and authority, we should respect authority, and that's a white concept, is what they say. We should put heavy value on ownership of goods, space, and property, which is, by the way, capitalistic, and in many kinds of ways, they're very closely associated, at least with capitalism, if it's not technical. And so they say that is a feature of whiteness, and we should run far away from heavy emphasis on ownership of goods, space, and property. And yet I would say in the center of these ideas, in the center of this bent continuum, is a place where we say we do value, and we think that we would like to share ownership of goods, space, and property. We would like to make it to where all people, we don't view it as a zero-sum game, where we think all people should be able to have those things. Look at this next one, future orientation, delayed gratification, planning for the future, time, following rigid time schedules. Time is viewed as a commodity. Now, let me stop and say, this kind of stuff, are we saying that the opposite of this, that we should not be able to delay gratification? Do you know what was said about black people in the days of Jim Crow and that justified separation and lynching and all of that? Do you know that the extreme right, the KKK right, was saying things like that African American people, black people, people of color cannot control their animal instincts, and that's why we should keep us separate from them? Do you understand that? Do you not know that they were saying they're a lesser race because they can't do delayed gratification? That's what the KKK right claimed. And now we're saying that that's associated with whiteness? Are you agreeing with the KKK? What is going on here? You see the horror and the way that the narrative and the political spectrum is not straight. It gets bent. So the extreme left and the extreme right wind up saying the same things sometimes. That's horrific. So you understand that delayed gratification, if we associate that with whiteness, like that's what the KKK did, and we shouldn't run far, far away from that. That's not whiteness. It's something else, isn't it? It's not whiteness to say we should be able to do delayed gratification. Now, continuing on, you go to ideas like emphasis on the scientific method, objective, rational, linear thinking. They identify on this thing as whiteness, as an assumption of whiteness that has been gradually accepted in the culture, so we all have to agree with it. Objective, linear, rational thinking is not a characteristic of whiteness. There were people in Mesopotamia, brown people, and northern Africa that worked on inventing calculus 1,000 years before Newton invented calculus. This is not new. This is not white. This is not at all. Cause and effect relationships. Are you saying that black people don't have the ability to grasp that? Because that's what the extreme right says. The KKK white supremacist blood and soil people, the John Birch Society people, that's what they say. Is that where we're going with this? Look at Protestant work ethic. Hard work is the key to success. Work before play. Are you saying that? Because let me show you this slide of people who were the enemies of the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau was an agency, a government agency to help people after the Civil War, to help African Americans try to get up onto their feet and get out of a slavery mindset and give them some measure of access to the tools of capitalism, which is ownership of means of production. You don't just own your labor and time and strength of your body, you also own means of production, other means of production. That was the goal, is to give them access into capitalism, which is one of the ways in which systemic injustice continues to affect us today. That lowered access to means of production actually lowered access to means of capitalism. The access to the system of capitalism is one of the ways in which we continue to see that playing itself out today. But I want you to look at this poster and see that that's what they were saying, that they can't do, that the Protestant work ethic is not something that Negroes in this term, this thing is, this poster was claiming that they can't do the Protestant work ethic and that it will prevent them from working their own nature. You can support Congress and support the Negro, sustain the president and protect the white man. Wow. Do you see how the bending of this has taken place? Now, there's lots more that we could talk about. Well, for instance, this slide here. Communication, the King's English, written tradition, avoiding conflict, don't show emotion, don't discuss personal life, and be polite. Are we really wanting to say that speaking with clarity in the language of a place, in the language of a trade or an economy, that speaking with clarity and power and ability, people like Martin Luther King Jr., who mastered that art, people like Frederick Douglass, are we really saying that that's whiteness? I would argue that it is not in the least bit whiteness. Instead, it's something else. And we feel that, don't we? Like as people who care about reconciliation, genuine racial reconciliation, we feel that that's not the same as whiteness. It's something different. What is it? Okay, here's what it is. In the middle of that bent curve is a territory of kingdom values. And maybe it skews to the right or maybe it skews to the left. I'm not making that argument right now. I'm saying in the middle somewhere is a thing that represents two things. One, it represents kingdom values. Okay? Love your neighbor as yourself and all those things. And secondly, the other thing that exists in the middle of that is wisdom. There are entire books of the Bible who talk about this stuff, written by Middle Eastern, Semitic, brown men. And those men, Solomon, who collects these proverbs and collected them, not all of them he wrote, some of them he collected from forebears and from people who no doubt passed down over time by Egyptian authors and people from that place or that region. He wrote these things, and he wrote about things like delayed gratification. He wrote down things like a word fitly spoken. He wrote down things like self-control and hard work, and he wrote down these things. These have nothing to do with whiteness. But do you see the polarization and how the polarization drives both sides into complete idiocy, into nonsensical removing of tools that are necessary and important, not because they're associated with whiteness, not because it's about, I want these people to do well in a white society. It's not about that at all. It's about wisdom. And it's about where's the ability to grasp these truths, not on the extreme right, that black people can't do this, and not on the extreme left, that black people should not have to do this because it's whiteness. But in the middle, that says, we recognize something beyond a political system. We recognize a set of values beyond just Americanism. We recognize a higher authority and a higher value and a longer existing thing that has existed that predates whiteness by thousands of years and predates any American political system by thousands of years. We recognize kingdom values and we recognize wisdom. And in that kind of context, we can create racial reconciliation. In that kind of atmosphere, in that kind of breathing in of valuable truth and valuable things that don't represent whiteness, they represent wisdom. And we have to find that kind of character, we have to find that kind of environment, and we have to facilitate it, and we have to create it, which means this is why I will always, and you will always, if we work for true racial reconciliation, there's going to be people on the extreme left that will never appreciate what we're doing. Because what we're doing is not based on whiteness. What we're doing is based on the kingdom. It started way before whiteness by a long shot, and wisdom values. And those things started a long time before anybody was thinking about black and white. And they predate it, and they will outlast concepts of whiteness. They will. And so that's what we're fighting for. And I think that that's an important concept for your church. I think that if you want to understand that, I want you to notice something about the book of Proverbs as you think about it. What's like the dominant phrase of Proverbs? The single dominant phrase of Proverbs is, my son, do this. My son, don't do that. My son, stay away from these kind of people. My son, get with these kind of people. My son, listen. My son, hear. My son, heed. My son, understand. That's the dominant phrase of Proverbs. And so consequently, if we are wanting to do something valuable and see true racial reconciliation happen, it has to happen on that kind of ground. And we have to reclaim the idea that that's not whiteness, that predates whiteness by thousands of years. And so if white people, just because white people reach out and grasp something like that and say, we want to hold to this, doesn't mean we should run from it. It doesn't. If we do, we're not racially reconciling, we're racially running. We're racially fleeing one another. And it happens on a right-hand end of things, and it happens on a left-hand end of things. And eventually, those people wind up bending down and getting close to each other, and real Christians should flee from that kind of foolishness. And we should stand firm in the middle and say, we value wisdom and kingdom values. Yeah. So, Ta-Nehisi Coates probably is going to be seriously offended. The white fragility author probably thinks this is white fragility. It's not. It's not. It predates whiteness by 1,000,000 years. If you want to call it fragile, it's fine, but it predates it for a long time ago. So, I'm getting a phone call coming in. God bless you. Talk to you guys next time.